In 1982, they said cocaine killed John Belushi. But his brother Jim knows something nobody else does. Now, at 70, he's exposing the shocking truth about John's football injuries, the brain disease nobody diagnosed, and the Hollywood cover-up that haunts him to this day. Here's what really happened to SNL's wildest star. John Belushi was born on January 24, 1949, in Chicago, Illinois. His parents were hardworking Albanian immigrants who built a life in America from the ground up. His father, Adam, arrived in the United States as a teenager in 1934. He worked long hours in restaurants before opening his own. His mother, Agnes, was born in Ohio to Albanian parents and spent her early years working as a pharmacy assistant before dedicating herself to raising the family. They believed in discipline and perseverance, values they passed down to their children. John grew up with 3 siblings, Marion, Jim, and Billy. Their home was strict, but full of love. Laughter was a constant presence, even when times were tough. John had a natural gift for comedy. He loved making people laugh, and his parents encouraged him, even if they didn't fully understand his talent. But John wasn't just the funny kid. He had a competitive spirit and a drive to stand out. When the family moved to Wheaton, Illinois, John found new ways to shine. At Wheaton Central High School, he became co-captain of the football team. His aggressive playing style earned him the nickname Killer Belushi. But his real passion was performance. He joined the school's theater program and quickly became a standout. His drama teacher, Dan Payne, saw something special in him. He helped John land a summer job in a professional theater in 1967. That experience changed everything. John knew then that performing wasn't just a hobby, it was what he wanted to do for the rest of his life. Music was another part of his creative energy. During high school, he formed a band with friends called the Ravens. He played drums and sang, bringing the same wild energy to the stage that he brought to football and theater. In 1965, the band recorded a single, "Listen to Me Now, Jolly Green Giant." It didn't become a hit, but it gave John his first taste of the spotlight. Performing in front of an audience felt natural to him, no matter the setting. After high school, John had a decision to make. He considered playing football at Western Illinois University, but chose a different path. He spent a year at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, then transferred to the College of DuPage. There, he co-founded a comedy group called the West Compass Players. They performed in small venues, including coffee houses and church basements. The crowds were small, but the performances were electric. John was refining his style, learning how to control a room with nothing but his presence. In February 1971, at just 22 years old, he took a major leap. He auditioned for the Second City, Chicago's legendary improv theater. He had no formal training, but his raw energy was impossible to ignore. He was unpredictable, loud, and fearless. The directors saw his potential and gave him a spot in the troupe. He was now one of the youngest performers at the Second City, earning just $150 a week. The money didn't matter. He was in his element, surrounded by some of the best comedic minds in the country. John Belushi's time at the Second City was more than just an early job. It was where he shaped his style and met the people who would influence his entire career. Among them were Harold Ramis and Brian Doyle Murray, two comedians who would later leave their own mark on the world of comedy. Ramis was a brilliant writer. He would go on to create Ghostbusters and Caddyshack, but in those early days, he was just another comedian trying to make it. He and Belushi became close, constantly working on sketches and bouncing ideas off each other. Ramis pushed Belushi to experiment with different characters, helping him refine his timing and delivery. Then there was Brian Doyle Murray, Bill Murray's older brother. He had a dry, clever sense of humor that balanced out Belushi's loud and unpredictable energy. The three of them, Belushi, Ramos, and Doyle Murray, became an unstoppable team. They were young, hungry, and determined to take comedy in a new direction. But the Second City was just the beginning. In 1972, Belushi landed a role in National Lampoon, Lemmings, an off-Broadway show that satirized the Woodstock Music Festival. The show opened at the Village Gate in New York and quickly became a hit. It was loud, fast, and completely ridiculous. The cast was packed with future stars, including Chevy Chase and Christopher Guest. Belushi fit right in. One of his standout moments came when he played King Herod in a parody of Jesus Christ Superstar. The sketch, called Jackie Christ Superstar, combined music and comedy in a way that made the audience go wild. The energy of the show was contagious. The cast fed off the crowd, and night after night, Belushi proved he was something special. Lemmings ran for 350 performances and got glowing reviews. Time magazine called it an uproariously funny spoof of the rock scene and its counterculture folk heroes. It wasn't just another comedy show, it was a launch pad. Belushi walked away from Lemmings with more than just experience. He had momentum. People in the industry were starting to pay attention. One of them was Lorne Michaels, a producer looking for talent for a new late-night comedy show. But before Saturday Night Live became a reality, Belushi took another step in his career. He joined the National Lampoon Radio Hour, a comedy radio show that ran from 1973 to 1974. Radio was a different challenge. There was no audience to feed off, no stage to move around on. Everything had to come through in his voice. It forced him to sharpen his delivery and focus on the rhythm of his jokes. The show also introduced him to more future stars. Gilda Radner, Bill Murray, and Chevy Chase were all part of the cast. Together, they created fast-paced, irreverent comedy that would set the tone for what SNL would later become. John Belushi's path to Saturday Night Live wasn't smooth. In 1975, Chevy Chase and Michael O'Donoghue pushed for him to join the show. But Lorne Michaels wasn't convinced at first. He thought Belushi's style, wild, unpredictable, and deeply physical, might not fit the vision he had for SNL. But then came the audition. Belushi walked in, did what he did best, and left Michaels with no choice. He had to be on the show. Belushi became part of the inaugural cast alongside Chevy Chase, Dan Aykroyd, Gilda Radner, and Jane Curtin. Bill Murray was supposed to be there too, but the budget was tight, so he had to wait. The first episode aired on October 11, 1975. In the opening sketch, The Wolverines, Belushi appeared second on screen, just a few minutes into the show, and already he was making an impact. But getting there had been a fight. NBC wanted cast members to sign 5-year contracts, paying only $750 per show. Belushi hated the deal and refused to sign. He almost walked away before the show even started. It wasn't until Bernie Brillstein, his soon-to-be manager, stepped in that he finally agreed. He signed the contract just before airtime. The first season of SNL was chaos. The set was unfinished hours before the premiere, and no one knew if the show would survive. But Belushi thrived in the madness. His energy was electric, his presence impossible to ignore. He brought a level of physical comedy that few others could match. That raw talent, combined with his chemistry with Dan Aykroyd, helped shape the future of SNL. Their partnership would lead to some of the show's most legendary moments, including the birth of the Blues Brothers. But that was just the beginning. Belushi's influence on SNL wasn't just about his energy. It was about the characters he created. Characters that became instant classics. Samurai Futaba was one of the biggest. A sword-wielding samurai thrown into modern jobs, always honorable, always serious, and somehow always hilarious. The inspiration came from Toshiro Mifune's roles in Akira Kurosawa's films. Belushi didn't speak real Japanese, but it didn't matter. His performance was so committed that it worked. The sketches became a staple, especially when Buck Henry hosted. Samurai Delicatessen, Samurai Tailor, Samurai Optometrist. Each one took the same premise and made it better. Then there was the Olympia Cafe's cheeseburger sketch. It was simple. A Greek diner where the only thing on the menu was cheeseburgers, Pepsi, and chips. Customers asked for something else, but Belushi, as the owner, wouldn't budge. The fast-paced delivery, the exaggerated accent, the chaotic energy, it became one of SNL's most famous sketches. People still quote it today. But Belushi wasn't just about loud characters and over-the-top physicality. He had an incredible gift for impressions. His take on Joe Cocker was so good that when he performed Feelin' All Right? On SNL, it was almost impossible to tell who was who, until the real Joe Cocker walked out and joined him. The performance was legendary. His Henry Kissinger impression was just as strong, turning the former Secretary of State into a bumbling, heavy-accented caricature. He took on Beethoven, Captain Kirk, even Marlon Brando. Every time he committed fully, making each impression feel like a whole new character. What set Belushi apart was his intensity. Whether he was throwing himself into a pratfall or delivering a sharp political satire, he gave everything he had. That energy was contagious, and it helped define SNL in those early years. He set a standard for cast members that followed, proving that SNL wasn't just about writing, it was about performance, about presence, about being fearless. But behind the scenes, the pressure was building. SNL was live, unpredictable, and exhausting. Belushi was becoming a star, but with that came expectations. More sketches, more performances, more appearances. He turned to cocaine to keep up. At first, it was just a way to push through the late nights, but soon it became something more. His drug use escalated. People noticed, but at the time, it was almost part of the culture. Everyone was burning out, and no one was slowing down. Even as his struggles grew, his work never faltered. Every week, he delivered. The audience never saw the exhaustion, the stress, or the personal battles. They just saw the performances, the ones that made SNL history. But behind closed doors, Belushi was fighting a battle he wouldn't win. John Belushi's rise in Hollywood was wild, fast, and unforgettable. His big break came in National Lampoon's Animal House, a 1978 comedy that changed the game. The movie was made on a tight budget of just $2.3 million, but it shocked everyone by earning over $141 million. It became the third highest-grossing film of the year, right behind Grease and Superman. No one expected an R-rated comedy to make that kind of money, but Animal House wasn't just a movie. It was a cultural event. Belushi played Bluto Blutarski, the ultimate party-loving troublemaker. He didn't just act in the role, he owned it. His physical comedy was a force of nature. In one scene, he smashed a guitar to pieces without hesitation. In another, he led an out-of-control toga party that became one of the most famous moments in comedy history. Some of his funniest moments weren't even in the script. At one point, he ran across wet grass, slipped, and crashed to the ground. Instead of stopping, he turned it into a perfect comedy moment. That was Belushi. He had a way of making chaos look effortless. The film's success went beyond ticket sales. College students across the country started throwing toga parties, all trying to capture the wild energy of the movie. Bluto became an instant icon. Belushi's performance made him a superstar, even though he was only paid $40,000 for the role. Hollywood had finally seen what he could do, and bigger things were coming. His next move was The Blues Brothers, a film that took a simple Saturday Night Live sketch and turned it into something huge. He and Dan Aykroyd played Jake and Elwood Blues, two brothers on a mission to save their childhood orphanage by reuniting their old blues band. It was a mix of comedy, music, and action, packed with performances from legends like James Brown, Aretha Franklin, and Ray Charles. The making of The Blues Brothers was chaos from start to finish. Aykroyd's original script was a mess, over 300 pages long and almost unreadable. Director John Landis had to cut it down before filming could even begin. But the real challenge was Belushi. His drug use was getting worse. He would disappear for hours, sometimes days, and the crew had no idea where he was. At one point, they set up a radio system just to track him down. But when he was on set, he delivered. He had a deep love for blues music, something Aykroyd had introduced him to, and he threw everything into the role. Despite all the problems, the movie became a hit, making over $115 million worldwide. It was more than just a comedy. It was a love letter to blues music and one of the most unique films of its time. Belushi wasn't done yet. In 1979, he starred in 1941, a big-budget World War II comedy directed by Steven Spielberg. It had an all-star cast, a huge production, and high expectations. But it didn't work. Critics were divided, and while it made money, it didn't reach the heights of Animal House or The Blues Brothers. In 1981, he tried something completely different. He starred in Continental Divide, a romantic comedy where he played a tough Chicago journalist who falls in love with a quiet scientist living in the mountains. It was a softer, more serious role, and critics praised his performance. But audiences didn't connect with it the same way. People still saw him as the wild, unpredictable comedian, not a romantic lead. Behind the scenes, his drug use was spiraling. During Animal House, he was already using cocaine heavily. Some of his funniest scenes were filmed while he was high. On The Blues Brothers, it became a bigger problem, causing delays and sending production costs soaring. People around him were worried, but Belushi kept pushing forward. John Belushi married his high school sweetheart, Judith Jacqueline, on New Year's Eve in 1976. She was more than his wife. She was his partner, his biggest supporter, and a key part of his career. She helped shape the Blues Brothers and stood by him as his fame skyrocketed. But as his success grew, so did his drug use. Cocaine became part of his daily life, and their marriage started to crack under the pressure. Judith did everything she could to help him. She saw the man behind the wild performances, the one who made people laugh but struggled with his own demons. She stayed with him through the highs and lows, but addiction doesn't wait for love. It took over, pulling him further away from the life they had built. His unpredictable moods and long disappearances left her feeling helpless. No matter how much she fought for him, she couldn't compete with his addiction. After his death, she made it her mission to protect his legacy. She wanted people to remember his talent, not just his struggles. In 1990, she wrote Samurai Widow, a book that showed the side of Belushi most people never got to see. She worked on projects that honored him and kept his memory alive. Over the years, she built a life of her own. She remarried and became Judith Jacqueline Belushi Pisano, but she never stopped caring about the man she had loved. In July 2024, after a battle with cancer, she passed away. She left behind a legacy of her own, making sure the world never forgot who John Belushi really was. For all his energy and confidence on screen, Belushi struggled with deep insecurities. Success didn't make them go away. If anything, it made them worse. Saturday Night Live turned him into a star. Animal House made him a box office sensation. The Blues Brothers proved he could do even more. But every new achievement came with more pressure. He had to be the funniest, the biggest, the best. And deep down, he was afraid he wasn't enough. Comedy was competitive, and he felt it every day. Chevy Chase had already left SNL for Hollywood, and Belushi hated feeling like he was falling behind. He worked harder, pushed himself further, and turned to cocaine to keep going. It wasn't just about partying. It was about staying sharp, staying ahead, and fighting off the fear that his time at the top wouldn't last. Cocaine was everywhere in Hollywood. It wasn't just available, it was normal. People used it at parties, on film sets, even backstage at SNL. For someone like Belushi, who was already struggling, it was impossible to escape. He tried to stop. There were moments when he fought to take control. During the filming of Continental Divide in 1981, he made one of his strongest attempts at sobriety. This movie was different. It was a romantic comedy, a chance to show he could do more than loud, physical humor. He had a bodyguard, Smokey Wendell, who kept drugs away from him. And for a while, he stayed clean. He focused on his work. He proved to himself that he didn't need cocaine to perform. Then came Neighbors, his next film with Dan Aykroyd. It was a disaster from the start. He hated the way the movie was being made, and the frustration pushed him back into old habits. He started using again. The mood swings came back. He refused to leave his trailer unless director John Avildsen left the set. His anger boiled over, and one night he trashed the office of Columbia's musical director. The control he had during Continental Divide was gone. John Belushi arrived in Los Angeles on February 28, 1982. He had plans to work on a film script and meet with Hollywood executives, but things quickly went off track. Instead of focusing on work, he fell into a cycle of partying and drug use. He checked into bungalow number 3 at the Chateau Marmont, a hotel known for its privacy and celebrity guests. It became his refuge, a place where he could disappear from the outside world. Each night, he roamed the Sunset Strip, moving from club to club. The Roxy, the Rainbow Bar and Grill, Dan Tana's. These were his usual stops. He wasn't just there to drink and socialize. He was looking for an escape. Cocaine was everywhere, and he took full advantage. One of his favorite places was On the Rocks, an exclusive lounge above the Roxy where celebrities could party in private. It was the perfect spot for someone like Belushi, who wanted to be surrounded by people but still hide his struggles. He looked worse by the day. His face was puffy, his energy gone. His wife, Judy, was back in New York, worried about him, but he wasn't listening. Even his friends were concerned. On March 4th, Robert De Niro and Harry Dean Stanton stopped by his bungalow. They found the place a mess. Clothes on the floor, food left out, an air of chaos. They invited him to dinner at Dan Tana's, hoping to pull him out of whatever dark place he was in. But he refused. He stayed behind with Kathy Smith, a woman with a history of drug use. That night, she injected him with heroin and cocaine. The next morning, his trainer and bodyguard, Bill Wallace, arrived at the bungalow to drop off a typewriter and a tape recorder. He found Belushi lying in bed, unresponsive. He tried to wake him up. Nothing. He attempted CPR, but it was already too late. John Belushi was dead at 33. The autopsy confirmed what many had feared. His system was overloaded with heroin and cocaine. His brain was swollen, his lungs filled with fluid, his body breaking down after years of heavy drug use. His death wasn't just a tragic accident. It was the final step in a downward spiral that had been happening for years. The Chateau Marmont, once a quiet retreat for celebrities, was suddenly the center of a media storm. Reporters crowded outside. Camera crews lined the streets. The hotel had seen plenty of famous guests, but now it would always be linked to Belushi's overdose. Kathy Smith, the woman who had been with him that night, quickly became the focus of the investigation. She had been supplying him with drugs for days, and witnesses said they had seen her inject him multiple times. After Belushi's death, she fled to Canada, but she couldn't escape what had happened. Eventually, she admitted the truth. She was the one who had given him the fatal dose. She was charged with second-degree murder and drug-related offenses. The case was everywhere, the headlines relentless. In the end, she took a plea deal, avoiding the most serious charges. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison, but served only 15 months before being released. The judge made it clear Belushi had made his own choices, but Smith's actions had played a direct role in his death. Jim Belushi believes his brother John may have suffered from chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, because of injuries from playing football in high school. He isn't saying this as a fact, but the idea makes sense given what we now know about head trauma. CTE is a brain disease caused by repeated hits to the head. It can lead to memory loss, mood swings, depression, and even dementia. For years, people thought concussions were the biggest danger, but research now shows that the number of times a person's head takes a hit, big or small, matters just as much. Studies on former football players have revealed how serious this problem is. In a study of 631 brains donated by ex-players, nearly half showed advanced CTE, while another 26% had early signs. Many of these players never had a diagnosed concussion, proving that even smaller, repeated impacts can cause lasting damage. For John Belushi, this idea raises an unsettling possibility. His comedy was full of energy. He crashed through tables, threw himself into wild stunts, and gave everything to his performances. If he had CTE, he never knew it. Nobody did. The disease wasn't well understood back then, and without an autopsy of his brain, there's no way to know for sure. But if Jim is right, it could mean John was dealing with more than just addiction and the pressures of fame. Jim also believes John's drug use was a way to cope with pain and stress. When Saturday Night Live made him a star, the pressure was relentless. He had to be funny all the time. He had to keep up the image. The lifestyle was exhausting. Cocaine was everywhere in Hollywood, and for John, it became a way to push through. He wasn't the only one. Many actors and musicians of that era relied on drugs to keep going. But for John, it turned into something he couldn't control. Jim has been open about how Hollywood made things worse. In the late 70s and early 80s, drug use wasn't just accepted, it was part of the culture. The industry ignored the problem, and in some cases, it even encouraged it. Some producers and directors turned a blind eye. Some made drugs available to keep actors working. In that environment, quitting was almost impossible. John Belushi's story is heartbreaking. He was a comedy genius, but his life was cut short at just 33 years old. Today, Hollywood has changed. There's more awareness about addiction and mental health, and more support for those struggling. But back then, people like John had to fight their battles alone. Despite everything, John's legacy remains strong. On May 4th, 2004, he was posthumously awarded a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. His impact on Saturday Night Live and comedy as a whole can still be seen today. He may have been taken too soon, but his influence never faded.